This is a short film about Cripping Breath towards a new cultural politics of respiration, a new Wellcome Trust Discovery Award funded project taking place at the University of Sheffield in partnership with Pathfinders Neuromuscular Alliance, the NHS, CRIPtic Arts, the Art House and iHuman. We would like to begin by introducing you to Betty. Betty is my ventilator, a BiPAP, which stands for Bi-Level Positive Airway Pressure. Betty BiPAP is very clever. She pushes room air into my lungs as I sleep to improve the level of oxygen in my blood. Now, I first met Betty in 2015 following a sleep study which revealed that my oxygen saturation was dropping over 30 times a night. A consultant handed Betty to me and told me to go home. It's really easy to use, she said. This is the on-off button. Now, I tried Betty that night, but it didn't work for me. She was really uncomfortable and made me physically sick. I popped Betty under the bed and wouldn't meet her again for another 2 years, by which point I was an inpatient with severe heart failure. I was lucky though. I had a bed with a window, this one, and I really enjoyed the NHS tea. I stayed for 3 weeks undergoing intensive inpatient training to learn how to use Betty. I soon returned home, heart no longer failing, but only under the promise that collaborating on breathing with Betty during the night would be my new reality. But this is only Betty's clinical story, and these clinical stories are already well known. And so are the dominant cultural understandings of what we think we know about the lives of those who live with ventilation. The idea that being on ventilation means one is near end of life, has a failing or ailing body, and ultimately a life of lesser value. In actual fact, my human story of Betty's presence is far more affirmative. Rather than being close to death, she enables life. I'm a mum, partner, daughter, carer, and academic. Betty is a tool, a friend, my travel companion, and the ultimate forbidden toy to my toddler. Like me, she has a life outside of the clinic and the clinical. I've begun with my own narrative in this short film to affirm the ways in which human stories of disability and illness are deeply valuable, how they counter dominant ways of knowing and offer new lenses that can inform respiratory healthcare. But Betty is just one form of respiratory technology and mine is just one story. I'm just a part of the 1 in 5 people who live with respiratory disease in the UK. This project centres the lives of people who've had their lives saved or sustained by ventilatory medical technologies, a diverse population of people with a wide range of health conditions, those with neuromuscular impairments, COPD, motor neurone disease, asthmas and more. But before I continue, I want to introduce you to our research team. Our very skilled research team is made up of academics, researchers, clinicians, experts by experience, activists and artists. In the team are myself, Kirsty Liddiard, but also Kate Weiner, Barry Gibson, Rod Lawson, Louise Atkinson, Jamie Hale, Sally Whitney-Mitchell and her assistant's dog Ethan, Sydney Thornbury and Suzanne Glover. We're a diverse team. Some of us identify as queer, chronically ill, disabled, working class, ventilated, older, women and obviously canine. Now, I'm telling you this because our diversity as a team is integral to our inclusive approaches to research. But let's begin here. Why is Cripping Breath important? Cripping Breath is important because we're living in a new respiratory age that needs urgent analysis of what we've called a new cultural politics of respiration. We centre respiratory health in Cripping Breath, but do so in a broader context that's worthy of attention. The first is how we are recovering from COVID-19 and how we are managing our everyday risk of infection, masks, CO2 monitors, vaccine equity and long COVID. Secondly, a global climate crisis. In 2021, the World Health Organization declared air pollution as the world's biggest public health crisis. Thirdly, is social deprivation and respiratory health. We've seen recently how the death of Awab Ishaq has shed light on a social housing scandal and how Ella Deborah became the first person in the UK to have air pollution listed on her death certificate. And now, more recently, we are amidst energy and cost of living crises whereby many disabled and ventilated people are struggling to afford to run the very medical equipment that keeps them alive. Breathing, then, is far from only autonomous and automatic. It's a social, political and embodied process which speaks to the need for inquiry that is inclusive of gender, race, class, age, disability and nationality within conversations about respiratory health, both in an ongoing pandemic and as we look to post-pandemic futures. In clinical contexts, Cripping Breath is important because clinicians are understanding the limitations of objective, clinical and lung function testing as ways to understand patients' everyday worlds. Specifically, our clinical partner wants to improve the introduction of ventilation treatment for patients and patient concordance to inform clinical practice. Cripping Breath is also important because of the ways it creates new cultural spaces for conversations about public health, risk and illness in an ongoing pandemic. We use the arts critically in Cripping Breath in our public engagement to co-produce creative forms of public education around respiratory health. As a disabled researcher, I can tell you that this project is important because of the ways it challenges the very rigid boundaries of research, theory and practice. In Cripping Breath, we research and theorise with those who are typically missing: disabled, chronically ill and ventilated people. Our explorations do so in recognition that these growing communities of people and patients are largely absent from contemporary theory and knowledge of respiration and ventilation. But ensuring that lived experience and marginality is valued in a project demands the development of creative, anti-ableist and inclusive research processes. To give you a very brief overview of Cripping Breath, in our narrative stream, our expert by experience co-researchers will employ virtual narrative methods to capture participants' everyday lived stories of ventilation. In the archival stream, we will spend 6 months with the Wellcome collection, virtually exploring archives of respiratory medicine to rewrite ventilatory histories from the perspectives of marginalised people. In our art stream, participants will work with professional artists via accessible and hybrid workshops to co-curate artistic data via research-informed theatre and visual arts approaches. And in the final stream, patient-led clinical ethnographies will follow respiratory technologies from clinics to the home to explore clinicians' and patients' negotiations of ventilator practice over time. We've designed the project so that each stream offers a distinct form of data while committing to responsive, flexible, hybrid, slower and COVID-safe approaches to work accessibly and inclusively together. To sum up then, Cripping Breath positions disability and chronic illness as productive, creative and disruptive. We will build critical scholarship around the lived realities of ventilation to explore a new cultural politics of respiration in a pandemic age. Most importantly is that Cripping Breath places people with lived experience at the very heart of the project to change the ways in which research typically happens. This means being experimental, innovative and bold. Our aim is for the highest quality scholarship that is radical in its research leadership, to explore what happens when disabled, chronically ill and ventilated people come together to co-produce theory and knowledge. We are very proud as a research team to have co-designed a project for Wellcome that truly values disability and chronic illness as the driving subjects of research and innovation. This is Cripping Breath. Thank you. To learn more, you can email me on k.liddiard@sheffield.ac.uk or follow us on Twitter @Cripping Breath.